different people.
Okay, God talked to three different people. Well, it's kind of like what? The Gospels, right? I mean, we have four Gospels. Why do we have four Gospels? What's that? Different people groups, possibly, yeah. What else can we say about God's Word? Yeah, it can target different groups of people, but what else? Repeat things three times because we're slow learners. What else do you think?
Giving us proof after all these years.
Okay. Yeah, and sometimes you see a prophetic perspective from, especially during the divided kingdom, from the northern kingdom versus the southern kingdom. You'll see kind of parallel histories taking place there. But what about the genres? What do I mean by genres of biblical literature? What are some genres? We've used that term before. What's a genre? Like poetry, prophecy, prose, which we would probably call history or narrative. Yeah. So all those things factor in as to why we have these multiple witnesses when we look at the scripture. So, well, we begin a new unit today, and that means we've got a new memory verse.
Yay!
Okay. You saw me coming, didn't you? Yep. Okay, let's do this. Psalm 32, verse 5, very encouraging verse. Let's say it together. I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. It's kind of interesting because we were practicing our music for this morning's worship already, and one of the songs is Great is Thy Faithfulness. And Great is Thy Faithfulness is a song of, how would you describe that? Is it a convicting song? Is it an encouraging song? Is it a worshipful song? What is it?
All those things.
Well, I think it's an encouraging hymn, right? But where does it come from? It comes from one of the Old Testament prophets, the book of Lamentations. What's Lamentations? If you're lamenting something, what are you doing? You're sad. Isn't that interesting? So here's the prophets, and they always bring bad news. Isn't that right? News of judgment. But what else do they do? Almost at the same time, on the tail end of whatever the condemnation judgment is, there is always this word of encouragement and restoration. What does that tell you? What's that tell you?
You can change your ways.
I think it tells me that God doesn't change his ways. He is full of justice, but he is also full of mercy. And that's some pretty good news. So, and that's what I think of as I look at Psalm 32, verse 5. So let's get right into our text this morning. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod, which is kind of interesting. The ephod was that priestly part of the priestly garment. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? Okay, who's the band? Anybody know who he's asking God whether he should chase? Not Saul. Now, if you remember, Saul had been pursuing David, and David's been hiding from Saul. David goes to Gath, and the king there, Achish, basically takes him in and harbors him because Saul's trying to kill him. Now, wait a minute. Gath, along with the other surrounding little fiefdoms around there, what did we call them collectively? The Philistines. So what David does to get away from Saul, who wants to kill him, is he goes over to the Philistines and he gives this line to Achish, king of Gath, and he says, you know what? If you let me, my people stay here among you in the town of Ziklag, I'll be your servant. I'll go out into a raiding party, and all your enemies, like Israel, I'll go raid them. So here is Achish thinking that David is out raiding the towns of Israel, and what's he doing at that time? He's raiding the towns of the Philistines. Ha 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 ha. And interestingly enough, in the midst of that, he's also helping out his own countrymen in the process. So there's a lot of intrigue going on there, and it gets to the point where David comes back to the town of Ziklag after being out on one of these raiding parties, and what do they discover? It's burned to the ground. Burned to the ground. And the guys who are with David said, "Oh, that's unfortunate." What was the response of the troops when they come back to their hometown there in Ziklag and find it burned to the ground? What did they want to do to David? No, they wanted to stone him. They wanted to kill him, Now, it was the Amalekites who had done that, okay? Now, David is got a dilemma on his hands. What do I do in response to this? And what he does is what? What's the first thing that he does? He inquires of the Lord. Who didn't do that before? That was not Saul's MO, was it? But here's David, a very different kind of leader. And so he gets the ephod. Abiathar the priest comes. They inquire of the Lord. And this is what he hears from God. He answered him, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue." So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Bezor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and about 400 men. So 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Bezor. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel. Okay, now we get into the part where, meanwhile, back at the ranch, the Philistines are fighting against King Saul, and the battle is not going well as far as Israel is concerned. And we're going to pick up the narrative now as to what was happening there. Now, it is interesting because the Philistine kings had gathered together to do what? To go to war against Israel. And what was David's response when you have Achish, king of Gath, aligning with the other Philistine kings to go to war against Israel? What did he say? Oh, no, he didn't say that at all. What did he say? "I am as you are. I'll go with you." Now, his military advisor said, "Wait a minute. That's not a great idea. This is all background." He said, "About the time we get in the heat of the battle, David will turn on you and he will fight for his own countrymen. Don't do that." So David is sent away. And it's interesting. Achish is doing what in that whole scenario? He's apologizing to David. "I know you're faithful. You're a good guy. I love you, man, but the other guys aren't going to go along with you on this." Wow. What an interesting turn of events and backstory to what's going on here. So David is released from having to go to war with the Philistine kings against his own people. So now we see the other kings of the Philistines going after Saul and the army of Israel. So let's see what happens. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. Boy, oh boy, this is not good. And you want to pause right there because of what? Yeah, there's Jonathan, who was supporting David, but at this point, at this juncture in the battle, he is with his father Saul, who tried to kill him. And what does his father Saul do? He gets him killed. Just the unfairness of it all, is just sad. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore, Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And we were talking about this 2 weeks ago as we finished up the previous unit. And, Saul was all worried about what? David being a turncoat and trying to kill him. And David had 2 opportunities. Remember the cave? Remember in the middle of the camp, where everybody's asleep, and all he ever did was protect Saul So Saul's fear was completely 180 degrees out of line with David's heart and the reality. And what did I say, 2 weeks ago? I said, and how does Saul die? Ironically, at his own hand. Yes, I know the enemies were pressing him and it was an act of desperation, but ironically, Saul dies at his own hand. Why? Was it because the Philistines were about to overrun him?
He was a coward.
Well, that's true, but I think that's another issue. Why?
He didn't want to be killed by the Philistines.
Well, that was the immediate circumstance. Saul died at his own hand. He ended up in those circumstances because what? The Lord had stopped talking to him because he had stopped following the Lord. He was unfaithful. It was really from the very beginning his own fault, from beginning to end. Okay, let's see. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men, all on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. Boy, oh boy, isn't that a sad commentary on the nation at that point in time? So they not only lose the battle, but they lose their towns. And you can only imagine how many casualties of war and how much stuff they lost as a result of that too. Well, the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. Now, Saul was all worried that his body was going to be abused. Well, this didn't help him at all, did it? So look what happens. So they cut off his head, stripped off his armor. Yeah, so you have this naked torso. Naked, headless torso. Wow. And sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. I mean, it's all grisly, isn't it? It's just all sad. It's all reprehensible. It's all dishonorable. It's all grisly. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there. Wouldn't you love to hear the book that was written about those guys? What a bunch of honorable, noble, daring, courageous. Why? Because they were willing to do the right thing, even at great personal risk. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. Gotta love those guys. Then Samuel said to Saul, okay, what? We've jumped around here a little bit, right? I thought Saul was dead. What's the deal here? Well, Samuel, what's the other issue? What's the status of Samuel? He's dead. So Saul had gone to the witch of Endor to try to get some insight as to what he should do, which was another stupid thing. Conjures up the spirit of Samuel, and this is what Samuel says, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul answered, "I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do." And Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you this day." So remember that battle? What was God's instruction to Saul?
Kill them all.
Okay. Yeah, kill them all. Just everything. Just complete genocide. Just wipe out the town. Man, woman, boy, girl, infant, cattle, sheep, everything. Glass parking lot. And what did they do? They don't do that, and Samuel shows up and, there's Saul saying, well, we did exactly what God said. And I love the line from Samuel, then what is this bleating of sheep that I hear in my ears? And that one act, you think something simple. Have you ever considered the consequences of your choices? Because we don't think that things are a big deal. And I don't think that Saul thought that was a big deal. He thought that was probably a lot of good reasons politically and, to do that. But he makes one dumb decision and literally all hell breaks loose as a result. Wow. And this is the consequence. And this is just kind of a retrospective of what had taken place.
Did he say, I kept them to sacrifice?
Oh, yeah. There's all of that religion. Oh, yeah, we're going to offer those in a sacrifice, right? Uh-huh. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your son shall be with me. That's chilling, isn't it? Tomorrow we're going to have a get together. We're going to have a potluck dinner. We're getting together. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. Let's listen to this now.
The book of 2 Samuel, chapter 1. After the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. Where have you come from? David asked him. He answered, I have escaped from the Israelite camp. What happened? David asked. Tell me. The men fled from the battle, he replied. Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, the young man said, and there was Saul, leaning on his spear, with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me, and I said, What can I do? He asked me, Who are you? An Amalekite, I answered. Then he said to me, Stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive. So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm, and have brought them here to my Lord. Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who brought him the report, Where are you from? I am the son of a foreigner, an Amalekite, he answered. David asked him, Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Then David called one of his men and said, Go, strike him down. So he struck him down, and he died. For David had said to him, Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, I killed the Lord's anointed. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jashar, A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain, may no showers fall on your terraced fields, for there the shield of the mighty was despised, the shield of Saul, no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieved for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have passed.
Oh, lots of interesting stuff there. So, what genre of literature was that you just heard? It's poetry, right? I mean, he breaks into this lament. David breaks into this lament for Saul and Jonathan. Poetry. You know, the passion behind David's loss at that point. What else was interesting there?
Definitely lamenting over his friend.
Lamenting over his friend, but this is one of those passages that the LGBTQ plus gang would say, see, homosexuals, which brings me back to last week. What did you think of the movie last week? Kind of quintessential Ray Comfort, huh? Love that man on the street. Yes, I see that hand back there. Yes. It is possible. Just write me a check for $50 and I'll make sure you. No, you can actually go onto YouTube and just look up Ray Comfort and and you'll see it's available there. Yeah, good stuff. So yeah, I mean, there was that whole discussion about homosexuality, and people trying to get you to think that David and Jonathan were homosexual lovers. No, not at all. But they did love one another, even to the point of death. That is true. Any other? Yeah?
Wasn't it here, or did you say that this Amalekite,
Yeah.
Saul, that he said Saul killed himself?
Yeah, you think about the Amalekite who shows up to bring the crown of Saul to David. It's like, hey, Dumbo, your people just wiped out David's people. He surely knew that, right? Being an Amalekite is not exactly going to put you in great stead. And if he'd been listening at all, to the way in which he felt about the King Saul, he would not have gloated over that. It is kind of interesting. We get a little more detail, though, don't we? Because Saul falls on his sword, and what's he doing? He's wallowing around in the ground, in his own blood and intestines or whatever. And this guy comes up and he says, kill me now. He says, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that. And all the while he thinks that when he takes the crown and he takes the news to David, that he's going to get a reward. And the answer is, yeah, you're going to get a reward, but you're not going to like it, that's for sure. Ooh, a lot of interesting things in that chapter. Let's keep moving on. So after this, David inquired of the Lord. There we go again. This is so unlike Saul, okay? Shall I go up into the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. David said, to which shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. Nabal the idiot, if you remember that whole story from the sheep shearing stuff. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And when the men of Judah came, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And when they told David, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. But Abner, son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth. Okay, so what's going on here? Whenever there is not a clear line of accession or succession, the question becomes in a political system, what?
Who gets the crown?
Who's going to be able to wear the crown? Now, in most situations back then, the answer would be, huh?
The first son.
Well, the person with the power, okay? Whoever has the most power at this point in time. Now, Abner, commander of the army, basically does a little coup d'etat, maybe, I don't know, or he thought maybe this was the logical succession. Maybe he didn't realize what Samuel had said in regard to David being the king, or maybe he just didn't like it and go along with it, right? Who knows? But for whatever the case may be, there's Abner, and he takes Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and he crowns him king. This is one of the first divisions within the nation of Israel. And this goes on for 7 years. Okay? Now, after the death of King David, what happens? We have the competition between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and what takes place there is Israel is split. You have the northern kingdom of Israel, and you have the southern kingdom of Judah, okay? And the northern kingdom of Israel is noted for what? What were they best noted for? What's that? Idolatry, actually, because Jeroboam didn't want them going south to worship at the temple, so he sets up two high places and causes them to worship the golden calf again, which is incredible. So we have the northern kingdom, and then we have the southern kingdom that David still has the people of Judah and Benjamin, I believe, are still. So let's keep going on here. Let's see. Ishbosheth's Saul's son was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, you shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel." So what's interesting, what's going on there? Abner establishes Ishbosheth, which is a weak reign. But what happens? What would we call that today? What's that? Well, okay, yeah, January 6th. Ishbosheth is weak, and all the tribes come to David. Would we not call that a populist movement? It's a populist political movement. They come and they say, "You're the guy. We don't want Ishbosheth. What we want is you." So that happens. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. Now David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. Now this is interesting because we're going to find out a very contemporary issue being played out here in this next passage, okay? All right. What is one of the popular disputes in the Middle East today? Is it not the city of Jerusalem, right? Up until the Trump administration, what was the capital of Israel? Tel Aviv, as far as the United States government was concerned. But under the Trump administration, we planted our embassy where? Jerusalem. Why? And why did that upset people? Well, because the Jews would say Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, right? It's the ancient capital of Israel. So here's David, the first, or the greatest, I say, the second king, but the greatest of Israel's kings. And the city of Jerusalem at this point in time is populated by who? The Jebusites, not the people of Israel. So we got a little bit of contention here. But today, what is the discussion? Who owns the ancient property rights to Jerusalem, right? And what do the Arabs say? It's theirs. What do the Jews say? It's theirs. Okay. So how is this going to be resolved here? Well, let's look at what we find here in 2 Samuel chapter 5. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, I love this, little cheeky, "You will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off," thinking David cannot come in here. Why? Because they had these massive fortifications. But there was one problem with Jerusalem, as in with any defensive positions are indefensible, okay, in case you're called upon tactics at any point in time, right? If you build a fort, you have a city and you build a fort around it, you're not going to be able to survive. Why? Huh? Well, you need two things. You need food and water, right? Now, food might be one thing. You can have a storehouse and you can last a long time, I suppose, but water is something that you need an ample supply of all the time. So what was it that fed the city? Well, there was a tunnel that fed the spring water into the city. And in spite of all its great fortifications, that was the one tactical weakness of the city of Jerusalem. And David knew it. Now, those guys were saying, you know what? This is such an impregnable fortress that the blind and the lame can repel you guys. But they weren't right. Let's see what happens. And David said on that day, whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul. Wow. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. So this is exactly that point in time where the title to Jerusalem goes from the Jebusites to the Jews, the people of Israel. Now, what has been the attitude of the current inhabitants of Jerusalem, especially those of the more Arabic persuasion? What have they been saying? Well, what they're saying, what they have been saying is King David never existed. King David never existed. That's what they've been saying. Which is why if you go to Jerusalem carrying a shovel, you're likely to get your neck slit. Because anytime you put a spade to earth there, you run the possibility of digging up evidence. And they have been digging up evidence. As a matter of fact, the City of David project, which we saw on Wednesday nights, do you remember seeing that if you were here? Talking about the excavation of the ancient City of David, which is exactly what we're talking about right here. How big is the ancient City of David?
Big.
No, not really.
No?
This church and the property that it sits on is the size of the ancient city of David, about 14 acres. Isn't that interesting? Huh. So that's what we're talking about, David kicking out the Jebusites, and it becomes the city of David and the heart, the capital of the nation of Israel. So, and David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. Wow. So, here we are. What stuck out to you today in this whole discussion of David becoming king? This is the synthetic part where you get to tell me.
He went to God's counsel every time.
Yeah, I mean, we saw at least on 2 occasions that David sought the counsel of God. One was pretty serious, whether or not he should chase down the Amalekites, right? Okay? So he was asking God for direction in a big thing there, but what about the second one? Was that as big a deal? What was the second one? Do you remember?
Should I go to Judah?
Yeah, I mean, should I go back to the land that I fled, in defense of my own life because King Saul was after me? Basically, what's he doing? He's asking God, where he should go and where he should stay. Is that a big deal? Do we do that?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Do we do it frequently enough?
Probably not.
Probably not. I mean, where do we find reference to that in the scripture? I call it God's business model. When you look at the book of James, what does it say? That you say, okay, we're going to go to this or that city, spend a year, make money, and do this, that, or the other thing. And what does God's word say? Aha! What you should have done was ask if it's the Lord's will, right? And that's a pretty good thing, because how does that equate with our current culture? Have we been doing great with this? Asking God? What have we been doing as a culture?
Whatever we want,
What's that?
whatever we want.
Whatever we want, okay. What? Follow our heart, Disney World, yeah. Ain't no God to ask, okay. So what have we been doing in deference to asking God? You know what I would say, and I've watched this, and I keep saying it, I keep saying it, I keep saying it. We ask stupid, simple questions, and we do it to our kids. What do we say to our kids?
What college you going to?
Well, maybe that's like the second or third question. What's that? What do you want to be when you grow up? And it puts it all in the realm of personal opinion and preference, right? Instead, we ought to be asking what? What has God called you to do with your life? That's a great question. We need to ask that question. And then we need to, and shut up. Why? Why would it be important to ask kids that question? What is God's call upon your life? And then shut up. Why would that be important? We're not God. They need to have that question sitting in the middle of their lap and be very uncomfortable with it. Because if you think about it, when we start asking that question up to that point, we've pretty much been making all their decisions for them, haven't we? Isn't that like one of the big first questions we should ask them when they get to that point where they can begin to digest big adult issues? What has God called you to do? And I think that can begin at a very early age, 5, 6 years of age. You don't need to expect them to give you an answer, but asking the question plants it up here, and then you keep asking it, right?
So his big problem was that he was God's he was God's anointed, but the last thing he did in life was call upon a dead person.
Yeah, well, he did a bunch of
for help.
Yeah.
Instead of calling upon God, he
Yeah.
called upon a dead person.
Yeah, no, he did a bunch. He had a whole list of stupid things that he did.
But calling upon a dead person is contrary to what God's law is.
Okay, so I have the option of talking to the living God or a dead guy. Yeah, I can see where you're going with that. Yeah. Ron, you were going to say something.
That comes back to us making and figuring out what God wants us to do as a person. Like, you're a minister, I'm a servant, he's a teacher. So teach them what they are best at that God called them.
Yeah, and we talked about this last week as we were talking about spiritual gifts, right? If you're a Christian, you have at least one spiritual gift. Discovering what that is and developing that into an active service is, part of the answer to that call. Yeah, absolutely. But we don't ask the question. And that's always been my bugaboo. Because we're so busy saying things like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Or what school do you want to go to? Or did you get good grades so you can get into a good school, so you can get a good job? See, it's all presumptuous talk instead of asking the most important question. What has God called you to do? Right? Why do you think we struggle with asking kids that question? Yeah. I think we don't know the answer to the question for ourselves. I think that's a big impediment sometimes. Yep. So what else impressed you about today? David seeking God's direction. How frequently do you do that? How frequently should you ask God for direction?
All the time, every day.
Do you have a set time?
Like manna, a little bit every day.
Okay. Or even a simple prayer before you get out of bed in the morning. By your grace, for your glory, guide my steps. Today is your day. Every day is your day. This is my offering back to you. What do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to say? What do you want me not to say? Well, right? Is that a good strategy? Asking God to direct every step and every word? I think it's very prudent, actually. I think it's a good idea. Okay? So what else impressed you today? Yeah, Carl.
Small Jerusalem. With the temple,
Yeah.
in the big palace, you thought there ain't even
Yeah.
room for a sidewalk.
Yeah, 14 acres, the ancient city of David. Now, it grew, obviously. Cities tend to do that. And what we see today as modern Jerusalem is, larger than the ancient city of David. But if you want to go back and look at that whole archaeological project that's taking place, it is fascinating. And I think it's going to, personally, my opinion, I think it's one of the end times things. I think that there's so much information being factual information where people aren't going to be able to deny this stuff anymore. I think God is taking away every excuse, personally. But you can go on the internet and check out the City of David project. Yep.
This one isn't as direct. It's another case where God achieved his will through an enemy of Israel. Like
Oh, yeah.
David couldn't kill Saul, but the enemy killed Saul. Wow. Saul killed himself.
Saul killed
The enemy
himself.
started killing Saul.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the way God has worked down through human history. There have been times where he has delivered his people, and there have been times where he has sent the neighbors of his people to spank his people, right? Which ought to give us some kind of reflection, some kind of pause. Do you think God's in the process of spanking America? If he's not, he ought to be. Yeah.
According to this,